Regrets. We all have them. Whether it be something from last week, last year, or decades ago, we long to make things right, to change direction, to begin again.
The good news is this: you can start over. You can actually learn to love your regrets.
Good morning. Would you join me in a quick word of prayer this morning as we get started? Dear God, I thank you so much that we once again get to come together to meet you today. That we get to worship you, God, that we get to show up and be in your presence. And then we get to just find out some more things about you today that are just the core of how you want to relate to us, God. And so I just pray that you just be in our midst. It's in your precious Son, Jesus' name, I pray. Good morning. Welcome to Evolve Church. My name is Wes Stapp. I'm the associate pastor here this fine day, the last Sunday of January. So I have a question for you that maybe some of you aren't going to like. How many of you came up with a New Year's resolution or made a New Year's resolution this year? How many? Anybody? Not anybody in this room. I see a couple people in the back. Man, fewer and fewer. I did. I had a New Year's resolution this year. I have a word for this year. It's intentional. That is my word for the year. I'm trying to be intentional in everything that I do, because in my past, I haven't always been intentional, so I'm trying to do that differently. I also heard something really interesting this week, and this is not to get you down, but I heard something interesting this week that you all might find interesting, that last Sunday, a week from today, January 19th, is the day that most people quit their New Year's resolutions, or they give up on them. 2.5 weeks in, 19 days, people are done. And I don't say that to discourage you, but what I find really interesting is that for some reason, for many of us, we like the idea of starting over. We like the idea of doing something new. We like the idea of having a do-over, if we were to say. That about 60% of Americans actually make some sort of New Year's resolution. And that's kind of today what we're going to kind of take that and frame up kind of where we're at and where we're going to go. This idea of having a do-over. And that's where we're beginning this series today, a series called Starting Over, as you see up on the screen. And this is a series really that was based on the book Starting Over by, I think it's Dave and John Ferguson. They're two brothers who are pastors that actually wrote this book, Starting Over, Living a Life Beyond Regret. And I think that if, for most of us, as we dig into this, for us to kind of look at this, for us to kind of see, okay, if we are a society that likes to have a do-over, if we're people that like this idea at the beginning of the year to start over, why is that? What does that mean? And I think it's this. I think for most of us, we all have some sort of circumstance or experience in our life from our past that we wish never happened. Things that, for no better term, that we regret. And this is exactly what this series is going to discuss. How to live our life beyond regrets. Not a life without regret, not a life forgetting our regrets, but a life living our life beyond regrets. So I want you all to just take a deep breath this morning. You can breathe a sigh of relief, because all of you today get to start over again in some way, shape, or form. That's what we're going to get to do today. We're going to give you that option. But I want to just be honest for a minute. I mean, all of us, I believe, have regrets. I believe every one of us do. And I know some of you might say, well, no, Wes, I don't have a regret. I live a life of no regrets. I've heard that before. I get that. But I'm not really convinced that's possible. Because even if we made every choice perfectly in our lives, not everything is in our control, even if that's our credo. I want you to take a look at this clip for just a minute.
Hey, those are cool tats, man.
That clip makes me laugh every time. When I was preparing for this, I was thinking about that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to show this. It's too funny. But I think it explains something deeper in kind of a funny way, that even if we try to live a life with no regrets, it's really impossible, isn't it? It really is. I believe even Scotty P, that character up there, is going to have some regrets when he learns how to spell, don't you? I think he's going to. He just doesn't even realize, he's not comprehending the regret that's already taken place. He will later on. But I know that we all have regrets. I know this because just based on my own life, I have a long list of regrets personally. I got tiny little regrets. This morning, just as I was here, one of my life group members, right, they said, Wes, you forgot to send me this thing you said you were going to send me. That's a little regret I have. I said I was going to do it, and I forgot to follow through. So I have a little regret there. That's little regrets that I have. Sometimes I forget to turn off the light in my closet when I leave the house. That's not really a regret I have, but I regret it when my wife reminds me that I didn't turn off the light, and she asks me, when are you ever going to turn off the light in your closet? Those are little regrets that I have. But I also have like some medium-sized regrets. I have some medium-sized regrets, like something at work that I was supposed to do and I didn't. Sometimes those things happen, and I regret that. Or the amount of weight that I've put on over the past 10 to 12 years of my life. That's kind of a medium-sized regret, because now I have to try to get it off. So I regret that, some of those choices that I made. But I also have these big, honking, huge regrets. Maybe you have some of those as well. I've got regrets like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that I let slip by. A stock that I didn't buy years ago, and now it's worth 100 times the price that I could have purchased it at. The schooling that I didn't finish. The relationship I walked away from. The business I couldn't save. Those are big, huge regrets that I have, and they're personal to me. And this is the thing I've come to know about my own regrets, is that they leave scars. And scars aren't pretty, and they stick with us. Sometimes they're hidden, but sometimes they're right out in the open, and everybody can see them. And it makes it even more painful sometimes, and it's hard for us to kind of move past those regrets. And for a long time, and for some of these regrets, I begin to hate that scar. I begin to hate that regret. And it's hard sometimes to really move past that. It has been for me. But just like I have my own personal scars from regret, I know that I'm not alone. I know that most of us have this same struggle when we come to regret. That even if they aren't talked about or discussed, most of us in some way or another are dealing with regret of some kind, large or small. And here's one of the ways I know that. There's a website called secretregrets.com. I went there and I kind of looked at it. I thought it was interesting to even have a website like that. I thought, man, a website, secretregrets.com. So when I went and I started looking at this website, I was like, wow, people need to get these off their chest in some way. But these things can be painful and they can be so hurtful that they don't even feel like they can share them with anyone close to them. That's how deeply personal and painful they are. So they have to post these things on a website called secretregrets.com. And I just want to read you just a couple of these, because I think it gives us kind of a frame of what some of us deal with. One says, I regret having 2 abortions. The father was a really nice guy, but at the time I was embarrassed to be seen with him. The choice was ours to do this, but it was heartbreaking to have done something like this. Looking back, I would rather have kept the babies and just loved them. It is almost impossible to forgive myself. That's a regret, something somebody went through that they made a choice to do. Deep, deep regret. Here's another one. I regret not finishing school. I thought I was punishing my parents, but I actually hurt myself in so many ways and for so many, many years. I've been able to get really good jobs that paid well, but I could have done so much better. The idea of an opportunity they're feeling like maybe they missed. And here's the last one. I regret allowing something I will never be able to control dictate my decisions in life. Constantly stepping down from the things I want to do because I'm scared of a seizure that might not even happen today. Regret of something that is really the cause of a circumstance, right? Outside of someone's control. And as I read these, they're just really tough. All of us deal with regret, and every type is really unique, isn't it? It's unique to us. And sometimes the sorrow that is attached to these regrets, it's so personal, we can't even explain it to someone else. We just sit there, and it continues to just make its home within us. But in order for us to look at our regrets in a way that's more helpful and not just painful, I think we need to step back and look at how our regrets originate in a general sense. See, regrets, I would say, kind of originate in three ways. That's what they talk about in this book, is they talk about, really, you could take three regrets, if you kind of broke them up and put them into different buckets, if you were, there's three different types of regrets. All of our regret fits into one of these three buckets. First are the regrets of action. These would be those things that when we just kind of put our hand on our forehead and we're like, why did I ever say that? Why did I ever do that? Lies that we've told. Relationships that we've torpedoed. Dumb choices that we've made. Rage we've unleashed. Money we may have blown, or addictions we've fed. For instance, I know that I've said things and instantly wished that I could shove them back into my mouth. Have you ever done that? Yeah, I have. Or I've actually done something that I was like, oh, Wes, why did you do that? That was so stupid. I've done that. Those are regrets that I would say are regrets of action. And action regrets make up the largest and most common category of regrets. But there's also another kind of regret. There's a regret we would call the regret of inaction. These are regrets of things that we didn't do or things that we didn't take advantage of. These can be things like opportunities we missed or time we wasted, risks we didn't take, love we left unexpressed, words not spoken, or forgiveness that we withheld. Researchers say that in the short term, people tend to regret actions, but in the long term, we tend to regret more inactions. And when I was thinking about this, when I was reading the book, and as I was kind of processing this message, I was like, there's a song that kind of stood out to me when I was thinking about this, about the regret of inaction. You ever heard the song Cats in the Cradle? Take you back a little bit? I want to share that song with you for just a minute. We're going to walk through that. Cats in the Cradle. That's Evolve Church, isn't it? Come on, we get to play a little bit of rock and roll here. It's pretty fun. But that song really just epitomizes a regret of inaction, right? It's about a father who never really took time with his son growing up, and he's regretting those times. And now, as he gets older in life, he's saying, man, I want to spend time with my son. And his son's saying, Dad, I'm just like you. I'm busy, and I got all these things going on, and I don't have time, just like you didn't have time. That's a regret. That whole song is a song of regret, of inaction, of time that wasn't taken, an opportunity that was missed that he can't get back. But for many of us, we see these two sides, right? We see the action, we see regrets of action, we see regrets of inaction, but there's a third type of regret. They just don't fit into those two categories. And these are regrets of what we would call regrets of reaction. These are regrets when we have things that were done to us, something that affected us that was out of our control. And sometimes these can actually be our absolute greatest regrets. Regrets of reaction would be things like the accident I was in, the illness I got, the abuse I took, how neglected I was, the rejection I felt, or the betrayal I experienced. See, when bad things happen to us, quite naturally we regret them. And sometimes these regrets of reaction are the ones that hurt the most. I want you to meet Jacqueline. She's someone that knows regrets. She's going to talk to us
Hi,
specifically.
my name is Jacqueline, and this is my starting over story. My mother migrated from Guatemala to the United States, and I was born in Boston. When I was 2, we moved to Chicago after my parents had separated. My mom was pretty much the entryway to all our family from Guatemala to migrate to the United States. So we never had a home where it was just a mom and dad and the kids. It was cousins, aunts, uncles, and so on, and neighbors from back home. Because of that, there was access to a lot of abuse for a child, and physically or emotionally and sexually. I kind of found myself in a sexual abuse situation from about 4 to about 12. At the age of 12, I told my mom, what had happened. I don't believe that she didn't believe me. I believe that she didn't want to believe me. And so, not growing up with my father, I think that's what made me gravitate to certain people that were not good for me, and that just set me up to have a failed relationship after a failed relationship after another failed relationship, because I was always searching for that fatherly love. For me, it wasn't like, why did you leave my mother? It was, why didn't you protect me, when I was a child? The reason that all kind of came to light is because I had started a relationship with a man, and that's where it all came back, and I had to tell this man, and I was 12, that he wasn't the first one to touch me in the way that was happening. And so this man was 8 years older than me. And at the time, I decided to start a relationship with this man that was 8 years older than me, who became the father of my child. I was 16 when I got pregnant. I was 17 when I had him. 3 months later, after he was born, I left this man when I turned 18. Still dealing with the anger and still dealing with the self-destruction, because I was still doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, but I was still very present in parenting. Go to work, come home, be the single mom, put him to bed, and then go out at night. And then come back home before Devon woke up. And so that was kind of like my routine from like Thursday to Sunday. Growing up as a child, we knew about God and we heard about God. I kind of knew, you have the notion that there is a higher being, but there is no relationship, there's no example or anyone really teaching that to me.
So Jacqueline was dealing with regret of reaction. And so she's stuck in a place. She got kind of stuck in this cycle of where the things that had happened to her in her past were actually playing into her choices in the future. And we actually can do that with all types of regret, not just the regrets of reaction, but all types of regret. That we can actually get caught up in a cycle. And they actually talk about this in the book. It's called the sorry cycle. And it's this process where we move from longing to regret, back to longing to regret, and we kind of get stuck in this process. And that's where Jacqueline got stuck. She was stuck going back. She was something unfulfilled in her, something that had happened to her, some regret that she was dealing with. But as she continued to think and process on that, she wanted to fulfill that in a different way, but she just had the longing. She didn't know how to fulfill it. She didn't know how to change that. And so she would just have this regret. It would come up. It would well up in her. And then all of a sudden she would long for something to fill that void that was created. But then she never knew how to move past that. And so she would just slip again back into regret again when she couldn't fulfill that void. And it just continued to sit there and go round and around and around. It's a cycle where we feel sorry about what we did, sorry about what happened, and sorry about what happened to us. We go from, we just sit in this cycle and we go back and forth. It doesn't matter which regret it is. And psychologists have a term for this, for getting stuck in our regrets. They call it rumination. Like a cow chewing its cud, our minds chew on our regrets over and over and over again. And one clinical psychologist explained it this way. They said, regret can have damaging effects on body and mind. When regret turns into rumination and self-blame, it keeps us from fully engaging in life. And that's kind of where Jacqueline got stuck. So let me ask you this. What regrets did you bring with you today? Are they regrets of action, inaction, or reaction? See, this series is designed to make sure that you don't get stuck in your regrets, like many of us tend to do. We all have regrets, and we want to show you how to break out of this sorry cycle, and not only break out of it, but to learn to love your regrets. Over the next few weeks, we're going to learn through this series a couple of things. We're going to learn how to recognize specific regrets. Some of them we may not even know we deal with on a regular basis. And to release those regrets to God. And finally, to learn to see regret as an opportunity to start over. My hope and my prayer for you is that we all come to see that God is big enough to redeem our regrets. I can pray and hope that for you because that's what He's doing with me. God has redeemed a lot of my regret. I'm still working on it. I'm still in process with it. But golly, He's bigger than it. And I know if that's possible for me, then it's absolutely possible for each and every one of you. We can all start over. We can all live a life beyond regret. One of the characters in the Bible who learned this lesson was Peter, one of Jesus' apostles. I want to take a look at two scenes from Peter's life, and I want us to see how Jesus helped Peter to also start over, for him to look past his regret. And we're going to look at this first story in the book of Luke, in chapter 22, starting in verse 54. This was a book written by Luke, who was kind of the historian of the day. He traveled with Paul, and so we've talked about this before in the past, he was going to first-hand eyewitnesses of the story and account of Jesus, and he recorded those accounts in the book of Luke. And so I want to share one of these instances, one of these scenes that we're talking about with Peter that can maybe help us here. So Luke here says, so they arrested him and led him to the high priest's home. We're pick up here where Jesus has been arrested and he's been taken to the high priest Caiaphas' home. And so when he says they arrested him, he's talking about Jesus. He says, so they arrested him and led him to the high priest's home. And Peter followed at a distance. The guards lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat around it, and Peter joined them there. Now this is interesting. So Jesus gets arrested in the garden. The guards are taking him back to this high priest's home to deal with Jesus, and Peter's kind of following him in the background all the way to the high priest's home. And he actually makes it into this courtyard, and he's watching from a distance what's happening to Jesus. And a servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. Finally, she said, "This man was one of Jesus' followers." She's talking about Peter. But Peter denied it. "Woman," he said, "I don't even know him." After a while, someone else looked at him and said, "You must be one of them." "No, man, I'm not," Peter retorted. About an hour later, someone else insisted, "This must be one of them because he's a Galilean too." But Peter said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." And immediately, while he was speaking, the rooster crowed. This is the crazy thing. If we go back and we back up just a couple passages before this, before Peter's denial of even knowing Christ, just hours before, in verse 33, we see him talk about and commit himself to Jesus. He's saying something completely opposite of this. Peter actually said in verse 33, says, "Lord, I am ready to go to prison with you and even to die with you." This doesn't look like a guy who just hours before said, "I'm willing to go to prison with you and die with you," does it? This looks like a guy who's faced with those exact things, and then all of a sudden he's just realizing the weight of the situation, and his instincts take over, and he's like, "I'm not doing that," right? And one of his best friends, if not his best friend Jesus, is standing there going through this entire thing, and he denies his friend right in front of him 3 times. And as the rooster crows, Peter starts to remember something. And right as this is happening, right as he crows, he's remembering Jesus' words before, and he remembers Jesus when he said that he would go to prison and even die with him. He remembers what Jesus had just told him when he said that earlier. He says, "Peter, let me tell you something. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny me. You will deny 3 times that you even know me." What a great tech team. I even get the sound effects, man. They make me look good. So even as the rooster's crowing, as Peter's last denial happens, it starts to flash through Peter's mind. He even knew what Jesus had predicted he would do, and yet he did it anyways. And then as he's saying it the last time, as the last denial is rolling off of his lips, he's thinking in his mind as that rooster crows, "Oh my gosh, what did I do?" And right as that rooster's crowing, it says down in verse 61, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Suddenly the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." And Peter left the courtyard weeping bitterly. After this, Jesus is condemned, he's beaten, and he's crucified. Can you even imagine the sorrow that burned in Peter's soul as his closest friend was laid in the tomb? Having to think about what he just did. I don't know about you, but that just has to be excruciating. That seems like regret you don't get past, does it? That seems like a lot of regret, especially when just hours before you're telling Jesus that you're going to walk with him to death, and now he's dead, lying in a tomb, and you denied him right in front of him. I don't think it gets worse than that. And even after the news comes that Jesus is risen, that he's alive, Peter's still carrying the weight of his failure. But I believe this, that many of us, we could probably understand that regret a little bit. We may not have the same circumstances. We may not have the exact things in our life unfold that same way. But I think we can all understand how that feels a little bit, right? Where we've done something, where we've contributed to something that went really bad, or that we know that we shouldn't have been a part of, or that we knew, man, I shouldn't have done that. And that just sits with us. So I think that for many of us, we can understand that. We can imagine maybe what Peter was going through. See, Peter could have gotten stuck in that regret, but Jesus wouldn't let him stay there. And this is one of the coolest pieces of how the Bible kind of plays off these two events. And I want to look at the next one. I want to fast forward to the second scene in Peter's life. After the resurrection of Jesus, some of the disciples, they're out in a boat and they're fishing. And we pick this up over in John chapter 21. But as we move forward into the second scene of Peter's story, after Jesus is resurrected, we find him out on the lake. We find him fishing. There's several of the disciples that have got together. They're out in a boat. And one of them shouts out, he says, I think that's Jesus out on the shore. And Peter gets so excited, he can't wait, he can't contain himself. He jumps out of the boat and he swims for shore, doesn't even wait for the boat to come in. He's so excited to see Jesus. And as the other disciples arrive on the shore, Jesus prepares some fish and some bread over a fire for them. And here's what he says as they come around Jesus. He says, now come and have some breakfast, Jesus said. None of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. This was the third time Jesus had appeared to the disciples since he had been raised from the dead. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, Peter replied. You know I love you. Then feed my lambs, Jesus told him. This is really cool. This is what's so cool about this story, that Jesus, in this exchange with Peter, he starts to do something to bring back the moment of his denial of him back in the high priest's courtyard. But he does it in a way that's incredibly loving. And he does it in a way to rebuild Peter, to build him back up. Let's see what happens. So the first time Jesus asked him, do you love me? Then he asked the same question again. It says, Jesus repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know I love you. Then take care of my sheep, Jesus said. And he doesn't end it there. He asked the question one more time. A third time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said, then feed my sheep. You see what Jesus was doing there? He took Peter back that 3 times asking him if he loved him. He takes him back to the 3 times that he denied him. As if to say, I know what happened. I didn't forget about it. But we're going to work through something. I'm going to use this opportunity. We're going to work through something about it. Doesn't accuse him, doesn't chew him out, doesn't do any of those things. But he brings it up in a way that Peter kind of hears it. And Peter's actually hurt by it because he feels that moment. And I think he even realizes what he does in all 3 of those times. When Jesus asked the question, not once, not twice, but 3 times, do you love me? Peter responds, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And there's something that's happening in this exchange, that Jesus is actually using it to help Peter start over. And the first thing that he's doing here is he's actually confirming Peter's relationship with him. It's implied in the question Jesus asks, do you love me? There's a priceless reassurance there because Jesus in turn is really saying, because I still love you. He wants to hear Peter say it because he's extending that same love to him. See, when we know we are loved, we can find the courage to face our regrets. It starts there. Jesus didn't chastise Peter. He didn't rehash what happened. He didn't blow it off as no big deal. He didn't give Peter the cold shoulder. He affirms his love for Peter, and he gives Peter the opportunity to affirm his love back. And in this, he confirms his relationship with Peter. But Jesus does something else in this exchange too. He also confirms Peter's purpose. That after each affirmation of this exchange, do you love me? He says, feed my sheep. Jesus, who earlier refers to himself as the good shepherd, is now commissioning Peter to join him in this mission that Jesus has to carry out to the rest of the world. As he says, feed my sheep. And by giving Peter a job, he's saying, Peter, you still have a purpose to fulfill. You're not disqualified. I'm not done with you. I need you. I want you. And I want you to lead and to care for my followers. See, he's reaffirming Peter's purpose, and he's confirming it. This scene between Jesus and Peter is one of the most spectacular exchanges in the entire Bible. Jesus refuses to let Peter get stuck in that sorry cycle. He confirms their relationship. He confirms Peter's calling. And now with this, Peter can move forward from regret and begin to start over. And here's what I want you to understand today. What Jesus did for Peter, he also wants to do for you. He wants to do the exact same thing. If you're stuck in regret of action, I think today you need to hear God saying, I love you no matter what. He wants to confirm his relationship with you. That nothing can ever change the way that I feel about you. Not even the dumb things you've done. If you're stuck in a regret of inaction, I think some of us need to hear God saying, it's not over. I'm not done with you yet. The opportunity is still here. It's not completely gone. You have a choice. There's something that you can do. And if you're stuck in a regret of reaction, I think you need to hear God saying that you're not damaged goods. That he can use those things that we had no say in or no choice in to do things that he planned for you a long time ago. I think we need to live into those words. I want you to hear those words resonating today. He wants to confirm your relationship. He wants to confirm your calling. He wants today to be the day you start over. Just like Peter, it was when Jacqueline met Jesus that she also got unstuck from her regrets in the past. Watch this.
During that time, I met a man who gave me a chance, and that was the beginning of a career change, a lifestyle change. I started caring more about my job and my son and my well-being than the partying, the drugs, and the alcohol. My oldest sister, her name is Shenny. She goes to work one Wednesday evening and suffers a brain aneurysm rupture. And by Friday, she was declared brain dead. And so that was the biggest earthquake of my life. I had lost my best friend, my cheerleader. So that rocked me. And I didn't know how to deal with this but to suppress it, just to ignore it. 8 months later, I have a mental breakdown. And I decide I'm done. And so I attempt suicide January 2 days later, after I come out, my nephew Steve collapses at work. He needed a new kidney. And so when I learned about the living donor, I put my name on the list. He needed a second chance at life, and I think I needed a second chance at life, a purpose. And so I think God uses this to give me my second chance. I called my mom and I said, Mom, I gotta go to church. And so I go to church that Friday and I asked for prayer. I was very scared, I was terrified. And so I asked God into my life and I told him, I asked Jesus, if you are real, if God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit is all real, then give me this. Give me him healthy, me healthy, and that we're gonna walk out of this operation on Monday together. I told him, I will be yours. I will give my life to you. I will serve you. So you make me useful. And we walked out on Monday. After the surgery and seeing that he did come through for me, I said, okay, well, this is serious. So I started learning, and I just dug myself into scripture. That started a journey of healing for me. Every day is an opportunity for me to start over. Every day I still mess up. Every day I can probably still go back to think about those things. It's not over, but I have a choice to start over every day, every morning.
See, what happens so often in life is that we see regret as a finish line instead of a starting line. It is amazing to me how God can use some of the most broken down parts of our life or experiences in our life to create amazing breakthrough. That's what he does. So, regret is actually meant to be a helpful thing. If we look at it correctly, it can actually lead us to reparative action in our lives. It actually can lead us to make change, to do something different. And that way we can kind of learn to love our regrets. If we know how to process them, if we know how to interact with them, as long as we don't get stuck in them. This is the last thing that Jesus does in that exchange with Peter on the beach. At the very, very end, Jesus says to Peter, he says, "Follow me." As if to say, I want to lead you on a journey. Come on, Peter. You can come with me. You don't have to stay stuck here. We can move past this. And just like he does that with Peter, he wants to do it with each and every one of us. He's saying, come, follow me. You can move past it. You can move out of it. You can move beyond your regret. And you can start over. Would you pray with me? I just want you to take a moment and kind of think about where you're at in your life. I want you to think just for a moment about what are the areas of your life that you want to do over in, that you want to start new, that you would give anything to start fresh in. Just think about that for a moment. If you have a regret of action that you're dealing with you, with everybody's eyes closed and nobody looking around, would you mind just raising your hand a minute so we can pray for you? Yeah, absolutely. I have some of those as well. If you have a regret of inaction, would you raise your hand? What about a regret of reaction? Would you raise your hand? See, this is unbelievable. See, God, man, he wants to just come and meet you in the middle of that regret. He wants to use it in a brand new way. Thank you so much for sharing that this morning. I just want to lift you up in a word of prayer, and I want you to really think about this next week, about what it could look like to move beyond those regrets, to move past them, to actually leave them behind. Take the things you've learned from them, but to actually leave them behind and live beyond them. Dear God, man, we all just have an enormous amount of regret. I know in myself, God, there's things that I just continually sometimes come back to that I have to battle. And I know that many of these people with their hands that were raised here today have the same thing. Lord, I just pray that you would just break this cycle within us, this sorry cycle, that you would use this series, God, to break us out of that cycle, God, that you could show us what's happening and that we could learn to move on from these regrets into the newness of life that you've given to us. That we would be able to leave them behind, God, and continue to follow you. It's in your Son, Jesus' name we pray. Amen.